My name is Clara Holloway. For as long as I can remember, my world has been framed by the soft, persistent drizzle of Port Blossom, Oregon. It's a city that smells of damp earth, salt from the nearby coast, and the heavy perfume of the rose gardens that stubbornly bloom through 9 months of gray skies. I've always found a quiet beauty in the way the mist clings to the fir trees and softens the edges of the world, a landscape that encourages introspection and a certain kind of gentle melancholy. It's a place that teaches you to find light in the shadows, a lesson I would come to need more than I ever imagined. For years ago, that landscape of gentle shadows was violently torn apart. I was 16, a fledgling driver with a brand new learner's permit, my heart set on the freedom that a driver's license represented. It wasn't about impressing friends or seeking rebellion, it was about the quiet promise of being able to drive myself to the library, to the art supply store, to the cliffs overlooking the turbulent Pacific, where I felt my thoughts could finally stretch their wings. My father, Richard, owned a successful high-end furniture business, Haverford & Sons, a name synonymous with quality craftsmanship in the Pacific Northwest. He was a man built like the oak he so often worked with, solid, dependable, but unbending. His rule about the car, a sturdy, safe, silver Volvo station wagon, was simple and absolute. I was to ask permission from either him or my stepmom, Eleanor, before I ever turned the key. So, on that overcast Tuesday afternoon, with my driver's test just days away, I did just that. My father was at a conference in Seattle. I found Eleanor in the sunroom, a space of glass and light that always felt like her exclusive territory. She was reading a magazine, a porcelain cup of tea steaming beside her. "Eleanor?" I asked, my voice small in the airy room. "Would it be okay if I took the Volvo for a quick drive? Just around the neighborhood, to practice my three-point turn." She looked up, her gaze cool and assessing, as it always was. "Just the neighborhood, Clara? You're not planning on meeting up with anyone?" "No, of course not," I said, a familiar prickle of irritation rising. "Just a few blocks. I'll be back in 20 minutes. She sighed, a delicate, put-upon sound, and waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. But be careful. Your father would be furious if anything happened to that car." Her permission felt less like a gift and more like a transaction, but it was permission nonetheless. The feeling of the key in my hand was electric. For 15 minutes, everything was perfect. The car hummed along the quiet, rain-slicked streets of our neighborhood, the windshield wipers keeping a steady, hypnotic rhythm. I was focused, careful, and a quiet thrill of competence bloomed in my chest. I was doing it. I was becoming an adult. Then, at a stop sign 2 blocks from my house, the world exploded. A sound like thunder, a force that felt like being hit by a freight train. My head snapped back, then forward, a blinding flash of white light behind my eyes. The sound of shattering glass and twisting metal was deafening, final. When the chaos settled, a profound, ringing silence fell, broken only by the frantic ticking of the emergency flashers. Pain, a deep, searing fire, began its slow, deliberate crawl up my spine. I was pinned, unable to move, my world shrinking to the agonizing space within the crumpled car. I was rear-ended by a drunk driver. That was the simple, brutal fact of it. The physical agony was immense, a landscape of torment I had to navigate minute by minute. But it was the other pain, the one that began to fester in the sterile quiet of my hospital room, that would leave the deeper, more permanent scars. Eleanor was the architect of that pain. While I was lying in a traction bed, my body a constellation of fractures and bruises, she wove a new story for my father. When he rushed back from Seattle, frantic and scared, she met him not with the truth, but with a carefully crafted fiction. She told him I had been defiant. That I'd been talking for weeks about wanting to impress my friends, that I'd taken the car to sneak out and meet them. She told him she had expressly forbidden me from going, but that I had snatched the keys and stormed out. My father, a man I had adored, a man whose workshop I'd spent my childhood in, breathing in the scent of sawdust and varnish, a man who had taught me to identify trees by their bark alone, did not come to my bedside and ask for my side of the story. He stood in the doorway of my room, his face a mask of disappointment and fury, and he pronounced his sentence. He believed her. Every single poisonous word. Our family had always been a fragile ecosystem. My biological mother had left when I was 4, a ghost of a woman who signed away her rights and never looked back. For years, it was just Dad and me, a comfortable, self-contained universe. He was my sun and my moon. When he married Eleanor, I tried. I was only a child, but I sensed even then that I was not a daughter to her, but an inconvenient pre-existing condition of her marriage. She was my father's wife. That was all. As I grew, our interactions became a series of minor skirmishes over chores, clothes, curfew, small things she would inflate into major transgressions, always presenting them to my father as evidence of my flawed character. And he, caught between the woman he loved and the daughter he was supposed to love, consistently, heartbreakingly, chose her side. The foundation of our relationship had been eroding for years. The accident was simply the earthquake that brought the whole structure crashing down. I was bedridden for nearly 2 months. The world was a blur of pain medication, physical therapy sessions that felt like torture, and the suffocating weight of my father's rejection. He'd visit, but he wouldn't sit. He'd stand by the door, his arms crossed, his lectures on responsibility and consequences a bitter counterpoint to the doctor's gentle updates. "You have to learn, Clara," he'd say, his voice hard. "Actions have consequences." But I asked her, I'd plead, my voice weak, tears streaming down my face. "Dad, please." "She's lying." "Eleanor wouldn't lie about something like this," he'd state, as if it were an immutable law of physics. "She's worried sick about you, but she's also deeply hurt by your deception." The injustice was a fire in my throat. During one of his final visits to the hospital, just before I was discharged, I finally broke. My frustration, pain, and grief boiled over. "She's the liar." I screamed, my voice raw. "She's always been the liar. She hates me. She's jealous that she can't have you all to herself, and you just let her. You always let her." He stared at me, his face pale with anger. He didn't yell back. He just turned and walked away. That was the last real conversation we had for 4 years. Instead of taking me home from the hospital, he arranged for me to be moved to my grandparents' house on the other side of Port Blossom. It wasn't about money, his business was thriving, and the insurance covered everything. It was about banishment. Eleanor had won. I was no longer welcome in my own home. My grandparents, Evelyn and Arthur, became my sanctuary. Their house, a cozy cedar-shingled bungalow surrounded by a riotous garden, smelled of my grandmother's baking and my grandfather's pipe tobacco. It was a scent of unconditional love. They didn't ask questions or demand explanations. They simply opened their arms and their home, creating a soft place for me to land. They hired a full-time nurse to help with my recovery and transformed their guest room into a convalescent suite. My grandmother would sit with me for hours, reading novels aloud or just holding my hand, her presence a silent testament to her belief in me. My grandfather, a retired professor with a quiet, observant nature, would bring me puzzles and history books, engaging my mind when my body couldn't move. In those first few months, the silence from my father was a physical presence in the room, a heavy, suffocating blanket. My grandparents tried to bridge the chasm. My grandfather called him, his voice firm but patient, urging him to visit, to talk to me. "Richard, she's your daughter. She's in terrible pain, and she needs her father," I overheard him say one evening from the hallway. There was a long pause. "I understand Eleanor is your wife," my grandfather continued, his voice laced with a disappointment so profound it ached to hear, "but to put her feelings, based on what is clearly a misunderstanding, above the well-being of your own child. Richard, this is a mistake you will regret for the rest of your life." Eventually, my father admitted the truth to them. Eleanor had given him an ultimatum. It was her or me. In his grief and confusion, clouded by her manipulation, he had chosen her. And so, the silence became absolute. My grandparents, bless their hearts, stepped into the void. They paid for my college tuition, celebrated my high school graduation from my bedside, and cheered me on as I took my first tentative steps without crutches. With their love as my foundation, I began to rebuild. I graduated from college with a degree in literature, my passion for stories now a shield and a solace. I found a small apartment downtown, filled it with books and plants, and surrounded myself with a constellation of kind, supportive friends who knew my story and loved me not in spite of it, but because of the strength it had forged in me. I had built a life of peace, a fragile but beautiful terrarium I carefully tended. I had no desire to disturb it by reaching out to the people who had shattered my world. I believed that family wasn't a title you were born with, but one you earned through loyalty, support, and love. By that definition, my father and Eleanor had forfeited their claim long ago. Then, for years after the silence began, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize, but a name that made my blood run cold: Eleanor. The message was brief, almost breathtakingly casual. "Clara, your father and I are renewing our vows next month. We would love for you to be there." I stared at the screen, a wave of disbelief washing over me. After 4 years of absolute nothing, after the lies, the banishment, the profound and utter abandonment, she was inviting me to a celebration of the very union that had destroyed my relationship with my father? The audacity was staggering. I typed a reply without a moment's hesitation. "No." I pressed send, my hand shaking slightly. It was a complete sentence. It was a boundary. It was everything I needed to say. But Eleanor, I should have known, doesn't accept no for an answer. A week later, she tried again. Her message this time carried a new tone of strained urgency. "Clara, I wanted to let you know that your father will be sending a formal invitation soon. It's very important that you come. Some of his key business associates will be there, people who know you from the photos on his desk. It would be awkward for him to have to explain your absence. It's time to let bygones be bygones, don't you think? For the family's sake." The photos on his desk. The thought was a fresh stab of pain. He had kept pictures of me, a ghost in his corporate life, a prop to project the image of a happy family man while the real subject of the photo was in exile. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about stage management. I ignored the message, determined not to be drawn into her drama. I went for a walk along the river, watched the boats drift by, and tried to breathe through the anger. But a few hours later, my phone buzzed again. Her tone had shifted from cloying persuasion to open hostility. "Ignoring me won't make this go away, Clara. I don't know why you insist on being such an ungrateful brat. Your father is trying to extend an olive branch, which is more than you deserve, and you're trying to humiliate him. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? He has spent years building Haverford and Sons. If you refuse to come, you can forget about ever seeing a penny of it. I'll make sure he writes you out of everything." The threat hung in the air, venomous and crude. It wasn't about family or forgiveness, it was about control and money. For years, I had held my tongue, maintained a quiet dignity in my exile. But her words, so filled with contempt, so dismissive of the profound wound they had inflicted, broke something open in me. The gentle peace I had cultivated was no match for this new assault. I blocked her number, a small, satisfying act of digital defiance. It wasn't enough. The next day, an email arrived. The subject line was simply, "Your father's vow renewal." It was from her. She reiterated the threats, this time adding a new detail. My father's company was in the final stages of a major partnership with Studio Sterling, an elite interior design firm from New York. The deal, she claimed, was contingent on my father's reputation as a stable, respectable family man. My attendance was not a request, it was a necessity for the future of his business. That was the moment the dam broke. All the years of swallowed pain, of quiet suffering, of being the silent, discarded daughter, rose up in a tidal wave. She had pushed me, threatened me, and tried to leverage my pain for financial gain. She had weaponized my father's love against me, and now she was trying to weaponize his business. I sat at my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. I didn't scream or cry. I wrote. I wrote my story, calmly, clearly, and chronologically. I detailed the accident, the lie, the abandonment. I took screenshots of her recent messages, the manipulative invitation, the threats, the email about the business deal. I put it all together in a single, long post. I wrote about forgiveness, about boundaries, and about how family is more than just a name. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, I made the post public. I tagged my father. I tagged Eleanor. And I tagged the few of his business associates, including the public page for Studio Sterling, who I was distantly connected to through old family friends. I let the truth have its own air to breathe. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The post went viral in the small, interconnected world of Port Blossom's business community. Friends, former neighbors, and colleagues of my father shared it, their comments a chorus of shock and condemnation. Within a day, the whispers reached the East Coast. The partnership with Studio Sterling, which had apparently been on shaky ground for other reasons, was officially cancelled. The reason cited was a misalignment of brand values. My grandmother called me that evening, her voice heavy with a mixture of support and sorrow. "Clara, honey," she said gently. "Your father, he's devastated. He says you've ruined him." A strange cocktail of emotions washed over me, a fierce, vindicating righteousness, but also a hollow ache of regret. My target had been Eleanor, her lies, her cruelty. But my father, the man who had failed so profoundly to protect me, was the one bearing the public and professional cost. My grandparents, while never once questioning the truth of my story, suggested that perhaps my method had been too scorched earth, that I had dropped a bomb on a conflict that might have been solved with a more targeted strike. Swallowing my pride, I took the post down. The point had been made. The truth was out. But the victory felt sour, complicated. Despite the flood of comments from strangers telling me I owed no one an explanation or an apology, I felt a pull, a need to reach out to the source of the original wound. Not to apologize for telling the truth, but to explain it. I sent my father a short, direct message. "I'm not sorry for telling my story, but I am sorry for the way it impacted your business. I was pushed into a corner. What Eleanor did, using your vow renewal to threaten and manipulate me, was cruel. It felt like a continuation of the lie she told 4 years ago, a lie that cost me my father." I didn't expect a reply. I expected more silence, or perhaps a fresh wave of anger. But a few hours later, my phone lit up with a response from him. "You're right," he wrote. "I deserved it. I don't blame you." The words were so unexpected, so devoid of the defensiveness I had braced myself for, that they knocked the air out of my lungs. I immediately called my grandparents. "He's been wrestling with this for a long time, Clara," my grandmother explained, her voice soft. "Long before your post. He told us a few weeks ago that he was having doubts. He said Eleanor had become a stranger to him. Your post just confirmed the things he was already starting to suspect." She then delivered the final, clarifying blow. "Honey, there were never any business associates invited to the vow renewal. It was meant to be a small, private ceremony. Just family. He told us he hoped it would be a way to get you back in a room with him. To start over. Eleanor invented the story about Studio Sterling to force your hand." The revelation landed with the weight of an anvil. It wasn't my father's plan, it was Eleanor's sabotage. She hadn't been trying to save his reputation, she had been trying to drive the final wedge between us, to prove to him that I was selfish and vindictive, that I would burn his world down for my own pride. And in her desperation, she had inadvertently exposed her entire web of deceit. The days that followed felt like navigating a landscape after an earthquake. The ground was unstable, the familiar landmarks gone. My father, I learned through my grandparents, had confronted Eleanor. The conversation had been explosive. He had asked her about the lies, not just the recent ones about the vow renewal, but the original, foundational lie about the car accident. Faced with his direct questions, her story had crumbled. He asked her to leave that night. The next day, he filed for divorce. The vow renewal, the event that had catalyzed this entire implosion, was, of course, cancelled. My father and I began a tentative, fragile correspondence via text. It was stilted and awkward, two strangers trying to find a language they had forgotten how to speak. The internet, the same tool I had used to expose him, was now full of opinions about what I should do next. Strangers advised me to maintain a strict no-contact rule, to protect my peace, to never let him back in. I understood their logic. It was the safe, self-protective choice. But my heart, which I had learned to trust above all else, was telling me something different. It was telling me that a clean break, a slammed door, felt like another form of running away. There were 4 years of silence between us, a void filled with unanswered questions and unspoken grief. I needed to understand. I needed to hear it from him. I needed, at the very least, one conversation for the sake of the 16-year-old girl who had cried for her dad in a hospital bed. I told my grandparents I wanted to see him. They offered their home as neutral territory, a place of peace and warmth where we could meet. They, too, were slowly reconnecting with their son, driven by the profound awareness that time is finite and grudges are a heavy burden to carry into twilight. According to them, my father was a changed man. The loss of the studio's sterling partnership, which would have once devastated him, now seemed trivial. He doesn't even talk about the business, my grandfather told me over the phone. He talks about you. He talks about all the time he lost. He says he failed as a father, and he doesn't know if it can ever be fixed. Hearing this, a tiny, cautious seed of empathy began to sprout in the barren ground of my anger. It was hard to see him as a victim, but I could begin to see him as a man who had made a catastrophic mistake and was now living in its wreckage. 4 days ago, we had the meeting. I walked into my grandparents' living room, the same room where I had spent months learning to walk again, and he was there, standing by the fireplace. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, the solid oak confidence replaced by a deep-etched weariness. When he saw me, his eyes filled with a sorrow so profound it was startling. We sat on the floral sofa, a chasm of 4 years between us. My grandparents brought us tea and then quietly disappeared, leaving us to the difficult work we had to do. He spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "There is no excuse for what I did. There are reasons. I was confused, I was manipulated, I was a coward, but there is no excuse. A father is supposed to protect his child. He's supposed to be her fiercest advocate. And I did the opposite. I abandoned you when you needed me the most." He looked at me, his gaze unflinching. "I believed Eleanor because it was easier. It was easier than believing that the woman I loved was capable of such cruelty. I didn't want to see it, so I didn't. And in doing that, I broke the most important thing in my life. I broke us." Tears streamed down his face, silent and unheeded. "After I kicked you out," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, the doubt started to creep in. "Little things. The way she'd talk about you. The satisfaction she seemed to take from your absence. But I was too proud, too stubborn, to admit I was wrong. I let my pride cost me 4 years with my daughter. I watched you grow up from a distance, through your grandparents, and I saw you becoming this incredible, strong, resilient young woman. And I knew, deep down, that I had nothing to do with it. You became who you are in spite of me." He finally took a deep breath, the sound shuddering in the quiet room. "The divorce is happening. She's gone. But that doesn't fix what I did. I know that. I can't take back the pain I caused you. I am so sorry, Clara. For everything. He then said the words that, in a way, gave me back my power. I will understand completely if you never want to see me again. If you want to walk out of this room and continue the silence, I will accept it. It's what I deserve. The choice is entirely yours. I sat there, the porcelain teacup trembling in my hands, and I listened. I let his words wash over me, sorting through the years of anger, hurt, and longing. There was no easy, cinematic moment of forgiveness. The wound was too deep for a simple bandage. I need some time, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I need to think. And that is where I am now. In the quiet aftermath, reflecting. I am on the cusp of a new life. I graduate from college in 2 months. I have a job offer from a small publishing house in Portland. I am about to be financially independent, a fact that gives me a clean, clear-headed certainty that whatever decision I make about my father will not be tainted by need or obligation. His business, though bruised, will recover. His wealth is his own. This isn't about inheritance or security. This is about the heart. Many would say to walk away. To choose the peace I fought so hard to build. But as I sit in my small apartment, watching the port blossom rain streak down the windowpane, I find myself thinking about more than just the last 4 years. I think about the 20 years before that. I think about him teaching me how to ride a bike, his hand steady on my back. I think about him building a bookshelf for my room, measuring twice and cutting once. I think about the good moments, which far outnumbered the bad. It is not a simple question of forgiveness. It is a question of rebuilding. Can we take the rubble of our relationship and construct something new, something honest and strong? After much thought, I believe I want to try. I've decided to ask him to go to therapy with me. To have a neutral third party help us navigate the minefield of our past and learn to communicate without the ghosts of old hurts crowding the room. It will be slow, difficult work. There will be setbacks. But for the first time in a long time, I feel a flicker of hope. He is still my father. Despite everything, that bond, frayed and damaged as it is, still exists. This isn't about returning to the past or recreating a family dynamic that was always flawed. This is about moving forward, about choosing to believe in the possibility of change, both in him and in myself. It's a chance to build a new kind of family, one founded not on obligation or shared history, but on a conscious, deliberate choice to heal. I am ready to leave the past where it belongs, and with cautious optimism, embrace the uncertain, hopeful future. The first therapy session was like stepping into a vacuum. The air in Dr. Anya Sharma's office was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions I'd carried through her door. The room was painted a calming shade of sage green, with thriving plants in every corner and a view of the West Hills, where the ever-present mist was beginning to lift. My father sat in the armchair opposite me, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his large, capable hands, the hands that could shape a block of walnut into a thing of beauty clasped nervously in his lap. We didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. The silence was a physical thing, a heavy blanket woven from 4 years of unspoken words, accusations, and pain. Dr. Sharma let it sit with us, her presence calm and unobtrusive. She didn't push. She simply held the space for us. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle. Richard, Clara. Thank you both for being here. This is a courageous step. Who would like to begin? My father cleared his throat. I should. He looked at me for the first time since we'd sat down, his eyes pleading. Clara, I know I said it before, but I need to say it here. I failed you. Completely. I was a coward. The word coward hung in the air. It was a word I had thought myself, a word I had screamed in the privacy of my own mind, but hearing him say it was different. It wasn't an excuse, it was a confession. It was the truth, stripped bare. I was afraid, he continued, his voice cracking. Afraid of admitting my marriage was a mistake. Afraid of Eleanor's anger. I let that fear become more important than my love for you. And there is no excuse for that. None. I listened, my heart a painful, rhythmic thud in my chest. I didn't offer absolution. I just nodded, a small, tight movement. I was 16, I said, my voice quiet but clear. I was hurt and scared, and the one person I thought would protect me, didn't. That was all I could manage in that first hour. But it was a start. We left the session in that same heavy silence, but something had shifted. A single thread of honesty had been pulled through the tangled mess of our past. In the weeks that followed, we began to take tentative steps outside of Dr. Sharma's office. Our first meeting was for coffee at a small, neutral cafe downtown. The conversation was stilted, full of potholes of awkward silence. We talked about the weather, my final exams, a new shipment of sustainable teak his company had just received. It was mundane, surface level, but it was also a beginning. We were relearning how to be in the same room without the ghosts of the past screaming at us. One Saturday, he asked if I would go for a walk with him. He suggested Laurelhurst Park, a place we'd often gone when I was a child to feed the ducks. As we walked the familiar path circling the pond, the scent of damp earth and rhododendrons filled the air. He didn't try to fill the silence this time. He just walked beside me, matching my pace. I cleared out the house, he said suddenly, looking at the gray water. The divorce is moving along. I'm moving into a smaller place downtown. Are you okay? The question slipped out before I could stop it. A part of me, the wounded 16-year-old, didn't care if he was okay. But the 22-year-old woman I had become found that she did. He gave a wry, sad smile. It's a relief, mostly. It feels like waking up from a long, bad dream. The hardest part is realizing how much damage I let happen while I was asleep. He paused, turning to me. Clara, I need you to know this. What Eleanor did was wrong, but the choice to believe her, that was mine. The choice to abandon you was mine. I can't lay that at her feet. I have to own it. I do own it. That was the moment. In the soft, gray light of a port blossom afternoon, with the ducks quacking in the distance, I felt a knot in my chest, one I hadn't even realized I was carrying, begin to loosen. He wasn't using her as a scapegoat. He was taking responsibility. It was the foundation upon which any real trust could be built. Our therapy sessions continued. We began to unpick the years before the accident, the small ways he had consistently sided with Eleanor, the slow erosion of my place in our home. It was painful, ugly work. There were sessions where I cried with a rage that surprised me, and sessions where he sat in stony, ashamed silence. But we kept showing up. Slowly, a new dynamic began to form. He started asking me questions about my life, not as a father checking up on a child, but as one adult curious about another. He wanted to know about the books I was reading for my thesis, about my friends, about my plans for the publishing house. He listened, really listened, to my answers. When I graduated, both he and my grandparents were in the audience. As I walked across the stage, I caught his eye, and the look on his face wasn't just pride, it was a profound, humbling awe. Later, he handed me a small, beautifully wrapped gift. Inside was a first-edition copy of my favorite novel, its leather binding soft with age. Tucked inside was a card. Clara, it read. You built this future for yourself. I am so honored I get to witness it. With all my love, Dad. It was the first time he had signed a card that way in over 4 years. A few months ago, he helped me move into my new, slightly bigger apartment after I got a promotion. As we carried boxes, our conversation flowed easily. We talked about a difficult author I was working with, about a new chair design he was sketching, about my grandparents' upcoming anniversary. It was normal. A simple, beautiful, hard-won normal. After the last box was inside, he stood in the middle of my living room, looking around at my life, the overflowing bookshelves, the art from local markets, the thriving fiddle-leaf fig in the corner. You've made a real home for yourself, Clara, he said, his voice soft with an emotion I now recognized as genuine respect. I find I don't think about Eleanor much anymore. When I do, the sharp edges of hatred have been worn smooth, replaced by a distant, clinical pity for a woman so insecure she had to destroy a family to feel safe in it. Her power over me is gone. My relationship with my father isn't what it was when I was a little girl who adored him without question. It can't be. We have both been changed by the fire. What we have now is something quieter, more deliberate. It's a relationship built on the sturdy planks of honesty and forgiveness, sanded by hours of difficult conversation, and joined by a mutual commitment to never let silence and fear win again. Sometimes, when the rain is drumming against my window in that familiar port blossom rhythm, a shadow of the old pain will flicker. The memory of the hospital, of his cold disappointment, will surface. But it no longer has the power to overwhelm me. I can acknowledge it, feel the echo of its sting, and then let it go, like watching a single drop of rain join the river and flow out to the sea. Healing is not a destination you arrive at. It's a landscape you learn to inhabit. My landscape is here, in this city of roses and rain, in the quiet strength of my grandparents' love, in the life I have built for myself. And now, surprisingly, it's also in the tentative, hopeful light of a rebuilt bridge, leading back to my father. We are still learning, still repairing. But for the first time in a very long time, we are walking in the same direction, and sometimes, when the clouds part just enough, the sun feels wonderfully warm on our faces.